Hello, and welcome to the next video in the series called Light for the Path, Part 1. We'll begin with the premise that a house divided against itself cannot and will not stand. Let us begin to examine those issues mentioned in the previous video that have been used so successfully to divide us as a people and as a nation. When we have finished with each of these issues, although I make no pretense that the examination will be exhaustive, perhaps you will nevertheless come to the same conclusions and reach the same diagnosis as I have. We've been misinformed and misled purposely in order to have us approach our understanding of these matters from an invalid premise. When we have the facts, we'll find that there were those who kept the misinformation flowing because they had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, and that perhaps we, the average citizens, are not really as far apart as we thought. I'm aware that these videos will not be embraced by all who read them, all who see them, all who watch them, all who listen to them. Some of you may even be angered or offended by what's offered here. Be aware from the beginning, however, that I've spoken only to inform and not to anger or offend anyone. I hope that each of those who carefully watch and evaluate the information here will find that it touches a place in their heart that will cause it to resonate as truth for them. I feel strongly that these subjects must be looked at frankly and without misunderstanding, and that's been my intention in creating these videos, regardless how radical or strange the content may seem to many of you. I'm equally certain that if this information begins to gain any level of credence with large numbers of people, that efforts will be made to cause what is stated here, and to perhaps even cause the speaker, to appear to be much more radical than may already seem to be the case for many of you. Excuse me. Those who would seek to do so, however, have forgotten that a house divided against itself cannot and will not stand, and there are already signs that some of you have perceived, to varying degrees, much of what is being outlined here, which indicates to me that the misrepresentation by others of many facts and the deliberate misleading of the people have not provided as firm a foundation of misinformation as many of the perpetrators now believe. It is nevertheless a sad fact to this speaker that we as a people have made it all too easy for those who would subtly but still powerfully divide us in order to continue through misinformation and other means to control or strongly influence critical policies and legislation from behind the scenes. Very much like the man behind the curtain in the classic story, The Wizard of Oz. Let us now begin to examine in more detail some of the differences that exist among us and that create such significant areas of concern. Excuse me. First, we can talk about religion. On the subject of religion, I will begin by saying that there is no higher aspiration than to seek with all your heart to love and to serve God. I believe sincerely that most people tend to feel that way. It is worthwhile to note, however, that we do not all approach God or manifest our feelings about Him in the same ways. Some of us may be very effervescent about our feelings and bubble over with joy and a full heart because of the way we love God, while others see Him more quietly in their hearts, and although they may not speak of Him as openly, they love Him no less. We're not all the same. God recognizes that and accepts and loves us despite our differences, and we must learn, for the sake of humanity, to do the same. For many believers, there is a constant temptation to look at others who may attend a temple, a synagogue, a mosque, or a different church, or who may not attend services at all, and see them as perhaps loving God less than we do, or that they must somehow be wrong in their beliefs. That's a temptation that we should resist. We must not be too quick to condemn others with a point of view about God or an approach to God that is different from our own. In the Judeo-Christian Bible, in the New Testament book of Acts, We have the example of Saul of Tarsus, with whom all of us would have disagreed significantly before his life-changing trip to Damascus. Yet, he became God's chosen vessel. And did not Jesus say that wherever two or more of us are gathered together in his name, there will he be also? He made no statement to indicate that the gathering must be in a building, a church, synagogue, temple, or so forth, just created for that purpose. There are a number of important issues that divide us on the basis of our religious beliefs. For example, I know that there are a great many who very strongly believe that it was wrong to remove prayer from public schools. There are great numbers of people also who believe that religious statements from the Bible, such as the Ten Commandments, should be visible everywhere without prohibition by law, including in government buildings. Jesus taught us better, however. He told us without question to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. If you believe that these things belong in schools and government buildings, then you're using the schools and the government buildings to teach your religious beliefs, even though you may not have had that original intention. That was never intended to be their purpose. That would be the same as using your church as a government building and as a place from which to carry out official government functions. That would be equally wrong. Remember, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. The place for religion and the teaching of religion is in the home and in the church, synagogue, mosque, or temple, but not in the public schools, and not elsewhere in the government. Are you so weary of teaching your beliefs that you're ready to hand over that function to the government and to schools and government officials? God forbid. Let your homes and your places of worship fulfill their responsibility and their purpose, and leave religion out of those other places where it was never intended to be. Even so, as a nation or as a planet of people, we would benefit by individually seeking in the privacy of our own hearts to better understand and serve God. That I truly believe, and I think many of you do also. One of the most important points to remember about the formative years of the United States is that people from Europe and all over the world struggled to come here in order to find religious freedom, the freedom to worship according to the dictates of their hearts. Many in our country today appear to be seeking to have our secular government replaced by a government based on a particular set of religious beliefs. There are at least two very significant reasons why that should not take place. The first is that it would change our country from being a place where people go to seek religious freedom to being a place where people leave to find religious freedom. That is exactly the reverse of what has played such a large part in making our country great over the years. Secondly, it should be apparent to you that you see God and your religious beliefs from your own point of view, as a result of your understanding of what you have read and been told about these matters over the years. Your neighbors see God from the point of view of their own beliefs. Those beliefs are very likely to be different from yours. Perhaps today your point of view prevails in the majority of our population. But think about tomorrow. You may happen to be a Christian who is a Protestant. What if tomorrow or next year or 5 or 10 or more years from now, the prevailing view of the majority is Catholic or Buddhist or Islamic or Jewish? Would you still then want your country to have a government based on religious beliefs? I think not. The framers of the Constitution understood this situation well and designed our system so that we would continue to have freedom of religion without those of one faith being able to force their beliefs on others of the population. Would you place limits on God? If you believe that all who do not agree with your beliefs will never find approval with God, then you limit God to whatever your narrow set of beliefs may be. I know that you're aware that there are many different denominations within the Protestant Christian Church. Their beliefs are not all the same. Do you feel that God is one who would take sides, or that the way you interpret the Scripture is the only possible way that God will approve its interpretation? Do not think so foolishly as to place such limits on God. That's just not a good idea. Looking at another area of concern, there are many within certain religious faiths who believe that we should teach abstinence to those who are unmarried and fidelity to those who are married in countries around the world, especially in areas where HIV/AIDS has gained a significant foothold. Those are admirable and commendable ideas that can be used as two parts of a very comprehensive plan to reduce the size of the world HIV/AIDS epidemic. But those two, abstinence and fidelity, must not be used to disqualify from aid those countries and people who do not strictly adhere to them. Others believe that condoms and the teaching of safeguards should be made freely available to people in areas where HIV/AIDS is growing very rapidly. These two groups struggle one against the other, while countless thousands of people are dying at a frightening rate. This is shameful and an abomination in the eyes of God. By all means, do both. Teach people abstinence, or teach them to be faithful as appropriate, and teach them to use condoms to be safe. People must also be taught the importance of testing oneself. Then take whatever steps are necessary to be certain that condoms and testing materials to test at home for HIV/AIDS are readily available to any and all who need them. If you or those belonging to your faith are pressuring those in government to withhold funds from the war against HIV/AIDS and allowing thousands upon thousands to die because you feel that the means being used to fight this or any disease are not in agreement with your religious beliefs, you should hang your head in shame and get on your knees to ask God to forgive you. Where did Jesus ever teach that those with sufficient influence should force their beliefs on the entire world and be willing to let those die who are suffering, or to in any way force the death of those who disagree or believe differently? Woe unto you who are guilty of such thinking. Would you be like the priests who traveled with the early explorers and who had put to death those native peoples who would not convert to the faith taught by those priests? How can you see yourselves as being different from them? Let us all be like the Good Samaritan, much more like him. He didn't concern himself with the faith or the beliefs of the man he helped, nor did he concern himself with the means or the approach that the host of the inn would use to take care of the man needing help, before he, the Good Samaritan, would leave his funds to pay for the cost of that care. Why don't we all go and do likewise? Let each of us choose and follow our own beliefs and take responsibility with God for those beliefs. We should then allow others to do likewise, as long as their beliefs do not bring harm to others. Such matters are between each believer and God, and outsiders were never meant to have a place in making that decision. Of course, you may offer your beliefs to others. That is understandable. But the key word is offer. If you believe by what I've stated here that I'm not sympathetic to your faith, regardless of what that faith may be, you're not correct. As I stated at the beginning of this crucially important topic, I believe with all my heart that there is no higher aspiration than to seek with all your heart to love and to serve God. Be grateful if you live in a country where you're free to do so without restriction. Stop trying to make it a country or a world where those freedoms exist only for those with your beliefs. It is at this point that we also need to discuss abortion, another area of significant concern in our country, and one of the most difficult and divisive areas of disagreement that exists with the American people and with many others in the world today. Seldom do we see any subject debated with such passion on every level. On this highly controversial subject, there are those who consider themselves as pro-choice, They believe passionately that a woman who is expecting a child should have the right to make the choice of whether or not to have that child. It is my understanding that most of them believe that safe and lawful abortions should be available for a reasonably set length of time after conception to any woman who seeks them, and many believe it should be so for any reason. On the other side, there are those who call themselves pro-life. Most of them believe just as passionately that life begins at conception, and many of them believe that abortion for any purpose is murder and therefore a sin against God. A great many of them hold in contempt those physicians and other individuals whom they believe are for abortion. A great many of them also believe that abortion under any circumstances, even due to rape or incest, or if the mother's life or health is threatened, should never be allowed. Some believe this so strongly that they have actually bombed clinics where abortions were performed and people have been killed, some openly and cold-bloodedly, because of the strong nature of the feelings held by some of those people who call themselves pro-life, as they concern themselves with this agonizing question. Let me tell you now that God condemns such killings and bombings and those who knowingly and willingly carry them out, just as God condemns those who have abortion after abortion without feeling or concern just because it's convenient, especially when little or no thought is given to the unborn child or to the karmic consequences of their actions in having the abortion or abortions. Human society and the culture today should be far beyond those days when killing each other was considered to be the only way to settle our differences, even those differences concerning abortion. For me personally, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to justify that method of resolving differences. How do you think Jesus would feel about us killing each other as a way of settling our personal differences? I want you to think about that. Really think about it. Both sides, as stated, hold their beliefs adamantly and passionately, and both sides have many worthwhile aspects to their point of view. And all of this can make a significant contribution to such a very important area of disagreement. It should be called to your attention, however, that both points of view leave room for enlightenment. It should first be pointed out that no person in their right mind is for abortion, although many good people do favor the right of a woman to have a choice in this matter. It's a very serious matter, and an abortion should never be performed without long and serious thought to make certain that the decision which is made will be the choice that is best at that time for that person, given the circumstances involved. I have no doubt that most of the women who go through such a procedure have not done so lightly. I feel certain that most of them must have agonized over the decision at great length. And if they made such a decision to go forward with that procedure, they very likely did so without joy. Let me tell you now that this kind of approach is the least that someone considering such a procedure should use. Because if she was intended to be the instrument through which the child that she is carrying was meant to use to come to this earth, and she denies that child the opportunity to do so, that is a very serious matter that will have the potential, like so many of our decisions, to have very serious karmic repercussions of one kind or another. If the mother's doctor believes that the woman's life or her health is threatened, or if the woman is a victim of rape or incest, then those considerations will weigh very heavily with God in favor of the mother, if after very serious consideration she makes the decision to abort the pregnancy. Again, this is still a very serious matter in the eyes of God, and even then should not be undertaken lightly. Remember, as we sow, so shall we reap. Except in those very unusual cases, such as those involving rape or incest, or where the health or life of the mother, as determined by her doctor, is at risk, it is recommended that no pregnancy should be aborted without consideration for the father. It is not being stated or recommended here that laws to that effect should be passed. It is simply the right thing to do in most circumstances, and should be done, or strongly considered, if it is at all reasonable to do so. The child is a part of the father as well as a part of the mother, and could not exist without both being involved. Whenever it is possible and reasonable to do so, and the identity of the father is certain, or can reasonably be ascertained, then, aside from the circumstances stated above, the exceptional circumstances, and assuming that the father is of or very near legal age, he should be contacted in a very private way and allowed to participate, if he so chooses, in the decision of whether or not to abort the pregnancy. If he declines or denies the child, or if there is insurmountable disagreement between the mother and the father, then the mother, who has the burden of carrying and giving birth to the child, should, with her physician and with her God, have the final word without legal or other repercussions. But the father, under the circumstances described above, should, when reasonable and possible, be allowed, if he chooses, to participate in that decision. Every woman who is not a victim of rape or incest, whose life or health, as determined by her doctor, are not threatened, and who has decided to abort her pregnancy, should also agree to counseling to whatever degree may be deemed necessary by her physician, to make certain that she understands the seriousness of the matter at hand, and that she understands all of the options that are available to her. In addition, the counseling that her physician will recommend, if he believes that she needs such counseling, must include and place emphasis on instruction to make certain that she understands what is required to avoid future unwanted pregnancy. In many cases, this counseling will need to be given, but it can and should be scheduled in a reasonable manner. It must be impartial and must never be done in a fashion that is designed to pressure the mother to decide in one way or the other, nor should it be designed to bring about feelings of guilt or feelings on the opposite end of the emotional spectrum that might make her think of it as being less than the serious matter that it is. Neither should the counseling be a long and drawn-out affair, but instead take place in one or perhaps two private sessions, as her doctor may recommend, with the most emphasis on how to avoid future unwanted pregnancies. The session or sessions should be scheduled to avoid extending the pregnancy unreasonably, and to avoid interference with job or household obligations in an unreasonable manner. All of this has been said about having a pregnancy aborted because a local, state, or federal government or other similar organization or institution must never be given the power by law or in any other way to tell a woman that she must have that child. If government is ever given that right, then what is to prevent the right being given to government to tell a woman also that she cannot have a child that she is carrying? Let me further say that no woman must ever be forced to have a child that has come to her as a result of rape or incest, or if having the child is likely to be dangerous to her health or life, as determined by her doctor. Neither should she be forced to abort such a pregnancy as long as she is of or very near legal age, and is capable of understanding, and in fact does completely understand the situation, and still wants to have the child. If the mother is not of or very near legal age, or is not legally mentally competent to understand the situation, then the decision should be made by her parents, or by those legally responsible. Such unusual and special circumstances, including rape, incest, or a threat to health or life, as stated previously, are sufficient to remove much or perhaps all of the karmic burden from the woman who makes the decision to abort the pregnancy, for any of those reasons, and even for some other women whose hearts God has examined and found to be worthy of His forgiveness. But even then, not without some possible consequences, compassionate though they may be. Very few women may consider lying about the circumstances, but God is never deceived and will deal with the matter appropriately in His own way and in His own time. As already stated here, we all must reap that which we sow. God has compassion far beyond that which we can conceive. But everything that we think, say, or do has consequences that God will use through His law of cause and effect, or karma, to help us to learn over a period of time to keep our feet on the high road. Some of His lessons can be very difficult and sometimes even painful, but usually over time they are very extremely effective. It should be pointed out at this time also that God has told us in Genesis 2:7, when the newborn becomes a living soul, God breathed into his nostrils a breath of life, and man became a living soul. A human being becomes a living soul at the first breath of life. I know that many who are considered or recognized as being in high authority have said that life begins at conception. But Genesis 2:7 is very plainly stated, and it's very straightforward, and it leaves very little to conclude except that the life of the embryo until the time of the first breath is an extension of the life of the mother. Those who read what I have written here regarding abortion and draw the conclusion that I am trying in some way to indicate that it is not such a serious matter after all would be gravely mistaken. There are few acts of humankind that would be considered more serious, and I have done everything possible to make that very clear to the person watching this video. I will say again, however, that this is not a matter that government should pass laws to prohibit or laws that will force it to happen. This is, in the final analysis, a matter between a woman, her doctor, and her God. And any woman who tries to leave God out of such a decision is making an even more grave mistake. My heart goes out to any young girl or woman who finds herself in a situation where she may feel the need to consider aborting her pregnancy. I know also that as a male I cannot fully appreciate all of the ramifications of being in such a situation. I realize that many women will be significantly hurt or greatly angered by what I have stated here, and I deeply regret that my words should hurt or anger anyone. A great deal of soul searching was done, however, before these words were ever put on video. A very great deal. And I am simply asking, except in cases of rape or incest or when the woman's doctor determines that her health or her life may be in danger, that the same kind of soul searching be done before making a decision to have an abortion, so that you can be as certain as humanly possible whether or not it is the best decision for you as a woman. What I have stated, I feel had to be stated. I believe that enough has been said about this subject for now. I want to thank you for watching this video. I invite you to watch the next and all of the subsequent videos in Part 1 and Part 2 of this series of videos. Again, thank you very much.